大家好. So I'm going to speak in English today so that we'll be more adjusted to our working environment. In our discussion, we can use Chinese or any language you prefer. Today, we're going to talk about building new intelligent quotient skills in the new world. 志向. So it's a long list of topics, and this is based on my few decades of working experience and ministry experience. So I have defined the art of 8Q leadership, and we'll look at what those 8Qs are in a very brief and a high level, and we'll focus on intelligent quotient, and that's actually the most popular and most well-known quotient of all the 8 quotients in the art of 8Q leadership. So we'll look into IQ and typical definition of intelligent quotient. We probably know it quite a bit, and we'll just get a baseline. And then my way of defining intelligent quotient, and what are some practical ways to help build up our IQ in the new definition. How can we develop that IQ and deliver results using our IQ? And what are some new IQ skills needed so that we don't just survive, also thrive? Then next week, we'll do part 2 to talk further about some of the hard skills and even some soft skills that would be needed. So we'll start with the basic introduction. The art of 8Q leadership came from my experience working in corporate America, in ministry, in teaching children and raising a family, all that summarized into the 8 quotients that's shown in this diagram. So always start with our relationship with God. So it's a well-rounded or holistic 360-degree relationship. We'll start with our relationship with God, the spiritual quotient, and then our relationship with ourselves, our character and our humility, knowing who we are. Then our relationship with other people, the emotional quotient that we probably heard quite a bit as well, and leadership quotient. And then finally is our relationship with task. How do we manage and work with task? And that involved the adversity quotient. And then our topic today, intelligent quotient and XQ, transformation quotient. So we'll focus on intelligent quotient today. Just want to give you a big picture how it all fits. So when we look at these 8 quotients, always an acrostic, right? So I developed this acrostic called listeners. And it's the listeners that's actually the most important role for a good leader. For us to really exercise these 8 quotient of leadership well, we want to have good active listening. So that's why I use the listeners to help us capture all these 8 quotient. So we're going to focus on excellent learning agility, intelligent quotient today. And you see all the other 8Q plus effective communication. Because however good your quotients are, if you cannot communicate well, it does not help. So we need to combine good communication skill with the different quotient that we may develop over our career, over our life journey. So if I reference the definition of leadership by the Center for Creative Leadership, they define these 4 core leadership skills for every career that we're in. Self-aware, communication, influence, and learning agility. So we're going to focus on learning agility. How well and how fast do you learn new things? And ultimately, how do you use your knowledge, what you learn, to solve problems? So we're going to go through those stages in our definition of intelligent quotient. So this is how I connect the 4 areas into the quotient that we discussed earlier. So I also make a connection of these 8 quotient to how we Christians can influence our workplace. So I connect these 6M, which is really very good summary offered by LICC Ministry in London. And I've really enjoy using these 6M to frame up a lot of my sharing and my teaching about how our Christian faith can be influenced. So we're going to focus on the second M, make good work. So in order to make good work, we need to manage the task well. And we already said we need those 3 Q, that intelligent quotient, our focus today, adversity quotient, not afraid of failures and adversity, and transformation quotient, embracing changes and the unknown. And that really defines who we are when you're able to manage the unknowns and the future changes. And that defines how good of a leader are you. So we're going to focus on the second M, make good work. And in comparison, we don't want to just be a mediocre worker and not using the best of our intelligent quotient. So we're going to talk about what IQ defines in a traditional way and how I define it, and how can we not just be a mediocre worker. We want to do our best and trust God with the rest. So we want to make good work using our intelligent quotient. So traditional intelligent quotients, and it's been a fun learning as I prepare this. And I've taught the IQ before, not go deep into the traditional definition. So Dominic, my husband, really helped me open my eyes, see a lot of new learning about IQ. So the traditional definition is a total score derived from a set of standardized tests or subtests to assess our human intelligence. And on the average, 100 is the IQ score. If we look at children, their IQ can range from 0 to 150. And the majority of the children tested would range from 80 to 120. And the adults may go a little higher. So we'll see a distribution here. So this is a typical bell curve. And based on the Wessler's intelligence score definition and the data they have collected, you see the average is 100, which is the peak and the maximum. And then any range, so plus or minus 15. So from 85 to 155 is the majority, 68% of us would be in that range. And then plus or minus 30 points, so from 70 to 130, that's pretty much all of us, 95%. And then anything below 70 or above 130, it's really very, the tail end of it, it's about 2%. It's very few. And then anything higher than 145, it's really outlier and very rare. So let's look at the ranges and how do we call them? So above 100, we'll start to call these people genius. So these are the different genius at the different categories. And how do we call them? So 115 to 124, typical university students, they're above average. A score of 125 to 135, are gifted, perhaps the postgraduate students. And then 135 to 144, are highly gifted, they're the intellectuals. So if you know your score, you can match where you are and get an idea what you may be categorized. And then 145 to 154 are truly the genius, perhaps equivalent to the professors. And then 100, and we have a Professor Vincent among us, right? So he is definitely a genius, and he could tell us if he wanted to share his score. And then 155 to 164 are higher level genius. So these are the typical score for Nobel Prize winners. And then 165 to 179 are high genius, and highest genius are really top, 180 to 200. And then anyone with a score greater than 200 is really unmeasurable. So we're going to meet one person who has higher than 200 IQ. So these are typical quote unquote genius that we may know, right? Albert Einstein, 160. Elon Musk is 155. And Stephen Hawking is 160. So it's around that range. So we go back here. So these are the level of Nobel Prize winner stage. Now, let's learn and get to know, and some of you probably know Terence Tao. He actually came from Hong Kong as well, like me. and he was born in Australia. His parents immigrated to Australia early on, and he was born there, and his dad is a pediatrician. So ever since he's young, he loves numbers, he loves math, and his IQ has been confirmed to be 230. That is history making, the highest IQ score. So we watched some of his video and teaching, and now he's teaching at UCLA. So you can see his age and his academic career. He graduated high school at age 7, finished college at age 16, master's degree at age 17, and he went to my school, Princeton, and graduated with his PhD at age 21. Then he became a full professor at UCLA at age 24. So what's very special with him is that his parents actually sought the advice of a Johns Hopkins professor who in charge of the gifted and talented program, and asked what to do with the child that's so gifted. So they really listened to this professor and tried to give Terrence a very normal environment and let him grow, not just excel in his so-called high IQ and good math skill. He's really in a healthy, well-rounded environment. And you'll observe his career throughout as we watch his video and get to know him, that he really cares about people. He loves to collaborate, even though he's so smart. He got the Fields Medal at age 31, and he's now 46 years old. So that's equivalent to a Nobel Prize, because there's no Nobel Prize in math. So he really got the top honor in math. And he also got the Genius Prize, MacArthur Fellow, Breakthrough Prize in math. And Terrence was rejected the notion of genius. He didn't think of himself as a genius. And he thinks that it still need hard work and really use his intuition, to still read literature, and he consider a bit of luck. And of course, for me as a Christian, I don't believe in luck. And then he really showed collaboration in many of his accomplishments, that he's not doing it on his own. So that's an example of a genius with high IQ. And we even saw him pictured here with Paul Erdos, another high IQ genius in math, and they were in conversation about some math topic, which is quite remarkable. And in researching about Terrence, it turns out I got a very big surprise. On the same search about Terrence and Paul Erdo, I got to see my coworker, Ron Graham. He and I were both in Bell Labs at the same time, and it was so sweet to see him with Paul Erdo and then Ron's wife, Fan Chung. Another big surprise is that they actually moved to San Diego and they were teaching in UCSD. So that is really a pleasant surprise. So let's look at the different scores in terms of how we see different culture, different countries may measure in our intelligent quotient. And remember, this is traditional, so I don't necessarily subscribe to the importance of IQ in this traditional definition. It gives us some measure, and we're going to learn what is the difference. So on the average, if you look at these different countries, you're probably not surprised that the typical Asian countries like us, coming from Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, China, the top 6 are ranked the highest in IQ. And we always talked about how Asians, kind of the stereotype, seem to have high IQ. We are good in memorizing formula, studying, and taking tests. Because that's how I was too in college. I know how to prepare for tests. I know what the professor thinks is important because I pay attention in my lectures. And then I know how to prepare and score high. That does not mean that I'm smart. I'm certainly not smart. And I don't even think I have a very high IQ. So yet from the IQ test, we may be good thinking on our feet and good at getting a high score, like these Asian countries are being ranked. And yet you'll see it later, and you probably know that if you look at the Nobel Prize winners and by ratio, the Asian countries may not necessarily have the most. Turns out to be countries like United States, which is number 28, or Israel, which is very known for innovation and creative thinking. It's number 19. So this gives you some idea, the range of these countries. So this really ties to our culture, the way we're brought up, the way that we're trained how to prepare and take tests. So if you go deeper and look at the actual score numbers for these top 16, but there are many tied countries in here, and that most of the Nobel Prize winner indeed are not from the Asian countries that we just talked about. And the score that we have usually reported are not connecting to the culture. So the culture really has a great influence on how we prepare for the test. And then when you look at the IQ test, it usually really just tests how well you remember things and how well do you reason and how good is your overall comprehension. So it's not really well equipped to give a meaningful score for the separate different abilities. So just looking at the IQ score could be misleading. And also between IQ and intelligence, there's a difference. So let's look at what the psychologists say about IQ tests. So Angela Duckworth, we know her well. She's Taiwanese descent, and she talks often about grit. She said, just being intelligent doesn't mean someone will be successful. And just because someone is less intelligent doesn't mean the person will fail. That is so true. So as an example, if you correlate IQ score to getting into good universities, when I was working at corporate America, many of my VP and bosses and leadership, they didn't go to Ivy League school. So they may or may not have high IQ, and yet they are good leader because of many other qualities that we'll talk about later. And then the IQ test, according to Scott Kaufman, said it measures a set of skills that are important to the society. However, these tests don't tell the full story about someone's potential because the IQ test favor people who can think on their spot, and that may not be common skill. So we'll be careful how to interpret the IQ score. Then what's the difference between intelligence and IQ? So there's a difference too. So if we say intelligence is the letter G, and then IQ score is the number that you get after you take the test. So we say that intelligence actually showing that the IQ score is not a perfect measure because it's often polluted by other factors like we just talked about, or even your mental state and your cognitive abilities. So here's a very good statement that we found online. IQ scores, I like the thermometer. So it's a measurement. It's a thermometer tool to measure. So you got a score. And G is the actual temperature that tells you if you're intelligent or not. So intelligence may not directly tie to the IQ score. And if we could use an example for chess players. So chess player really need good strategy and good skill. So intelligence could help, but you need more than that. As those of you who are good at playing chess, and you tell us, you need a lot more than just intelligence or high IQ score. You need perseverance and patience to really think through the strategy and to solve the problems. So for those of you, and I'm not a good chess player, for those of you who are a good chess player, you would usually have these good skills such as problem solving, abstract reasoning, creative thinking, calm under pressure, patience, sportsmanship. Even when you lose, you're still not going to get upset or throw a fit, pattern recognition, and strategic thinking. So these are some examples of many other skills that are needed above and beyond your intelligence, above and beyond your IQ. And these are examples of my leadership at work. They may not have gone to Ivy League University. They may or may not have high IQ, and yet they are good at solving problems, asking questions, and critical thinking. So I have blended that into my definition of IQ. So I have defined 4 stages of IQ maturity. So it's not limited to the traditional definition of intelligence quotient. So here we go. First, the very basic is being curious. As you heard from Steve Jobs at his commencement speech at Stanford, he said, we want to stay hungry. So minimum, lowest level of IQ maturity in my definition is to be curious, willing to learn information and stay hungry, figure out, oh, what happened? And then grow your intuition as you gain more information. So that's not enough. Second C is critical thinking. So now you have some information. We want to translate that into knowledge. So it's not just knowing 1 + 1 = 2. That's a formula and you learn it. And yet you also learn the knowledge behind it so that you digest, reflect on it, and summarize what you really learned and put in a thinking cap, a critical thinking cap. How did it happen? And start to ask some questions and make some relevance on the information you learned to the knowledge and to some problem that you may be faced with, and try to have that independent critical thinking. And I'll give you some example later. And then cause and effect. And if you look at this critical thinking graph, you'll see it involves some analysis, communication, sharing with others, and listening to others, open-minded, and then applying those into problem solving and with some creative thinking. And we'll include that in the next few C. So that's critical thinking skill to help get to the second level of IQ maturity in my definition. Then the third C is the cause and effect. Not only you know information, knowledge, now you have the wisdom to define and understand if something action you take, you're going to have certain consequence. And wisdom, actually, as we typically and say often, the beginning of wisdom, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So when we really fear God and go back to his word, gives us wisdom and gives us the ability to define what is right, what is wrong. It's not just knowing some knowledge, it's actually knowing, is that right and is that wrong? Because there's a cause and effect. If you take this action, make this decision, you're going to have this consequence. And you learn that interdependency, and you learn and grow your wisdom and have the right value and decide, is this the right thing to do? As we know, many people may be really smart, and yet they didn't have the wisdom to make the right decision. And at the end, you can see some of their life get ruined. So wisdom can be gained through asking a lot of good questions. And we talked about this in our fellowship, right? What are some good questions to ask? And I learned to build wisdom by reflecting and summarizing, and then think through the cause and effect and put them into an acrostic. And you know, I love creating acrostic. And then diagrams. I love drawing diagrams so that we can do a flow chart and make sense of all the piece parts and get it organized. And then ask, why does this happen and why does it not happen? So really go deeper to integrate all the piece parts that you learn, cross-discipline, and have a collaborative thinking. So that's the third level of maturity in our intelligence quotient. So in your cause and effect, often you ask and use these connection words, right? If cause and effect, if, because, so, as a result, due to, since, or then. So these are examples as we think through what we learn and put them into a cause and effect relationship. You can use these connection words. And then finally, the highest level of IQ maturity, in my definition, is creative problem solving. You think about all the knowledge and wisdom that you gain. Your goal is to solve problems in all the jobs and careers that we have. Our goal is to solve problem, whether it's technology problem, medical, health, or economics, financial, education. So all the 7 mountains, right? All the different career that you're in is to solve problems. So ultimately, do you have good IQ? In my definition is, are you progressing from curious to critical thinking to cause and effect, and then truly applying all that you learn to solve problem in a creative way, to think out of the box, to apply the knowledge into real life situation, so that you don't, so that we don't just build up our knowledge, but really have a big head, and yet we want to have a healthy body and put it into practice so we can apply them. So it's not just the aptitude, also having the right attitude. So when you do that, you would be careful to know some of your transferable skills that can help you from one career to another, that you can still take with you to solve problems, and also help you to think ahead of time, that you don't just react when problem happens. You will try to be proactive, try to be predictive, expecting certain things may happen so you can prevent it, and preventive. So you kind of live in a mode of anticipating and be ahead of the game, so that even before the problem happens, you may expect it and how can you prevent it. So that is rich set of skill related to creative problem solving. We can foresee something coming, and when something is changing, you can adapt to it, and even have the ability to persuade and convince others when you see something happening and you need the team to see it in the same way. So this is my 4 levels of 4C maturity, thought leadership, in my definition of intelligent quotient. And these are still very much with hard skill. Next time, we'll talk a little bit about soft skill. So these are very much tied to a hard skill and how we can make solution and make it organized out of the messy challenge and problem that we may be faced with, just like this cartoon. So that's really integrating all these 4C. So here are some examples in my classes, how my students and my mentees really applied to the, for example, in this case, the career planning. So this mentee took our Call to Work course in 2020. And in 2021, she was searching, looking for a job, and finding her passion. So from the course that she took and the tools that we talked about, she used them all. In fact, she excelled in the tools. And I'll give you some examples. So because of all the tools that help her understand her passion, and then she finally used the 4C model that we just talked about, she realized that she wasn't just a business analyst or data scientist. She actually is passionate about project management. So that's where she found her passion to be a project manager. So she applied this 4C model, and she summarized the definition in the definition column. And then she started to ask herself many questions, and she addressed each level in where she is and what her passion is at each of these levels. And then she defined what the next step would be and what would the goal be at this maturity level. So in the curious stage, she knows that she's very passionate with being positive. She's a high achiever. She's a developer, helping others, arranger, and connectedness. So these are her top 5 strengths from StrengthsFinder. So she knows to grow her curiosity by having very consistent, as she was looking for jobs, to have daily job application, and polish her hard and soft skill to prepare herself. And her goal is to get the project manager. And she did. And I'll show you her whole career plan because of these 4C tool that she applied. And then beyond the curious, she wants to grow her critical thinking. So in the future career, she wants to become a senior project manager. In order to do that, she wants to grow her critical thinking by really using the acrostic we came up with to prepare, to reflect on what she learned and take action and yearn to improve. So she would develop her project portfolio based on the project manager's skill and experience, and try to look at and build strategic business outcome. So that's her second maturity level she wants to grow in the future. And the third level is her cause and effect. She's passionate about team building and focus on customer needs and service-driven and detail-oriented. And those are the areas that she knows she needs to grow in order to get to the third level. And when she's at that late stage, she wants to become a product manager, because now it's not just executing projects. She needs to grow strong in a particular product domain and build relationship with a team, with the customers, and also find a mentor in product marketing to prepare herself. And then finally, creative problem solving. In the future, she wants to grow to that fourth level and become a product marketing manager. And at that level, she would need both project management skill and product management experience to become a product marketing manager, because they would need to interact with C-level, have industry knowledge, marketing strategy, and marketing communication skill. And at that stage, she wants to be a good servant leader, problem solver, and result-oriented. So this is an example of how she applied this 4C model and think through what she would want to grow and how to develop. So as a result, she developed this 10-year career plan, and she calls it a stretch plan. So 2021, in a miraculous way, because of all the different tools, she actually got 2 job offers during pandemic. And then she mapped, and it's in project manager. So she mapped out this 10-year career plan because of that 4 stages of IQ maturity. And she expects to work on each one of these for about 2 years or so. So I want to give you a tool how to describe your IQ strength or any of your strength. And I've shared this before, and I just want to integrate this and reinforce how important it is to articulate and to communicate your strength to people using the S.O.A.R, situation, obstacle, action, and results. Just like Isaiah 40 reminds us that we can soar on wings like eagles. And recently, I've helped some people with mock interview, whether applying to college or applying for jobs. And I always encourage them to prepare at least 3 S.O.A.R stories. One on intelligent quotient, I'll give you an example. One on emotional quotient, and one on adversity quotient, minimum. Because all companies, all schools want to have people who have high IQ, minimum, right? That you can solve problem. And then you want people who can get along with others with good EQ. And we're not going to talk much about it today. And that you can deal with adversity, challenges, failures with high AQ, because we are bound to fail at work or at school. So minimum, everyone should always have 3 S.O.A.R stories in these 3 quotients. And that your story should tell people why, what, how, and how much. So I'll give you an example on IQ. And the mentee that I just talked about, she did 15 S.O.A.R stories. And you can see some of those examples in our website in the Equip tab. And I'll show you the website later. And she did all 15 stories, and I included them in one of our classes as really good example for people to learn and prepare for interview. So here's an example. So this is a detailed example, but I'm going to give you a simple example, and I'll go into this detailed example. Intelligent quotient. So it could be less than a minute. You say, I'm a fast learner. I enjoy learning new things and solving problems. One time, my professor asked us to use a tool that we've never learned before. And that tool usually takes a 13-week course to study and learn the tool. I took the initiative to study online for 3 weeks and ask expert. As a result, I learned the tool and I helped my team to use the tool and finish the project, and we got an A. So that's an example of telling the situation, having this tool that the professor asked. And the obstacle is that we've never learned it, and it's going to take 13 weeks. And yet I took the action, 3 weeks, right? So you want to put numbers, 13 weeks versus 3 weeks. And you also define your strength in the beginning. I'm a fast learner. I enjoy learning new things and solving problems. So that's a definition of your strength, how you define IQ. And then your action, so I took the action 3 weeks to study and ask expert. And as a result, right, we got an A. And also reflect the team. So this is a real example of one of my mentees. So we have many, many S.O.A.R story example. So think at a high level, why are you involved in this problem? What is it? How did you solve it? And how much impact did your action lead to? So as you hear the story, you don't hear all the detail. So you don't need to put more detail, because more detail can be distracting. And more detail, really, the person may get lost, not sure if they follow. So you need to elevate at a high level what is important, what matters to them, and don't miss out the impact. So here's a student who was very creative in using the 4C and the S.O.A.R story and share how he started in a medical device company and how he had a challenge. And I'm not going to go through it in the detail, but he really applied the curious, the critical thinking, the cause and effect, and then the creative problem solving, and then got a very good result. So I encourage you to think along those lines. So we're going to end here and get ready for some small group discussions. I want to share some resources. So we talked about how important communication is. An example, how do you come up with this S.O.A.R story? How do you ask good questions? How do you build a good personal brand and have a good relationship and rapport with others? And how do you address all these very sticky and difficult and sensitive situations? So I'm actually teaching a course on Shine Your Talk for 6 weeks during February and April. It's 2 times a month, so you have time to digest and apply in your work situation. And of course, these skills also apply to your workplace. So I'm very excited to finally teach this course. And we already have a group of small group leaders waiting, and that is registration will end on February 1st. So we welcome for you to think about it and look at all these questions. When your boss does not recognize your strength, your subordinate is not performing, your coworker is difficult to work with, your partner blames you for no reason, you were skipped for a promotion, your ideas were not received. How do you ask for a promotion or for a raise? And how do you find a mentor or ask for a mentor? So these are ways that we'll learn how to communicate in this course. So the resources, we have YouTube channel, Call to Work, like this one will be in this channel after we process it. And we also have the website, calltowork.org. And these QR code will get you to the YouTube channel and get you to the website that you can ask for devotions. We offer devotions for workplace, very practical in English and in Chinese. So this is our website, and we have resources to encourage you to equip and to expand. So when I said the S.O.A.R stories, they're in the equip. So next time I'll show you exactly where it is when we do part 2. And then we have different groups you're welcome to join, whether it's Line, WhatsApp, WeChat, or YouTube channel. And then we have Chinese content. You can take a screenshot if you like. And then the devotion, every Wednesday is in English. Every Monday is in Chinese. It's the Thank God It's Monday. And the two content are different. So we thankful to start the Chinese devotion last July. And then we have people from around the world reading it. For the English one, with people from Africa who read that. And then we put all the Chinese devotion collection into the Theology of Work website. So we're very thankful to have that opportunity to share all the devotion there. So this is the link and the QR code that you can go and look at all the devotions if you didn't get the past weekly email. So this is the website, theologyofwork.org. It has hundreds some theologians who help to make connection and application from the Bible to our workplace. So it's very powerful. So there's English, Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, and such. So this is English, and any roles would be interested, whether it's pastor, working Christian, or academia. So this is the Chinese website for Theology of Work. And we always welcome coworkers to help us. We have content that we need help to put more in, and it has millions of users and readers. So this is a very good resource. So next time we'll come back to talk about how our IQ, the hard skill, and the new technology trend, and how can we stay ahead and be more proactive and predictive and preventive